People still trickle in. We'll just get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today on how to avoid the common pitfalls when introducing your next software solution. I will be the moderator for today's event. My name is Chuck Rodriguez with Earthling Interactive. But I'll talk a little bit more about our company and a little bit. I work on the business development team, and I'm very excited to bring you guys today's presentation. So Garrett will tell you a little bit more about Yahara software.
Oh, hello. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for coming out and talking about software. It's something that we're very excited about at Yahara Software. Just a real quick a bit of firmographics about Yahara. We have been on the Madison's west side here for about a little over 20 years now. Primarily, we work in two industries. We write custom software for laboratories and medical and scientific instrumentation. That's one branch, and then another branch of our company does work with the transportation industry and managing the telematics in the transportation industry. We are really excited to be here today and to talk about creating software projects.
Yeah, and then a little bit more about Earthling Interactive. We're also a software development company in town, a little bit over 20 years in business as well, helping companies in all kinds of industries, from education to construction to all kinds of higher ed, basically with their software initiatives from websites to e-commerce stores and custom applications. Very similar to Yahara. We're in different areas, but that's kind of where we have focused in the past, and very excited to educate you guys on things that we have seen through our experience in working with clients. So right now we're just going to take a little bit and meet the panelists, guys. We're going to start off with one of the folks at Earthling, Becky Gibson.
Thanks, Chuck. Hi, I'm Becky Gibson. I'm the Director of Marketing Technologies at Earthling. So I lead the team that works with our content management system projects. So like things like WordPress, Craft CMS, Magento. And I also lead the usability and accessibility portions of our services and product offerings. Jamie?
And then
oh, sorry.
You go ahead.
All right, so I'm Jamie Rowley. I'm the Director of Applications at Earthling Interactive. So I really focus in on the custom work that we do, building things from the ground up, but also helping people analyze over-the-shelf solutions to see if it's going to meet their custom needs in their business. So I've been in the custom development world for over 15 years now, and I really like getting to see everybody's different challenges that they're facing and how we can solve them.
Next, we'll bounce it over to the Yahara team. We can start off with Josh.
Yeah, I'm Josh Piat. I'm the Director of Engineering at Yahara Software, and yeah, I guess lead all of our engineers across a couple domains in a lot of the initial contacts with people and helping figure out applications. I really enjoy digging into people's ideas and how we can create, let's say, creative solutions to solve those needs, especially in the biohealth spaces and things like that. So yeah.
And that leaves, last but certainly not least, Garrett Peterson.
Hi, my name is Garrett. I'm one of the partners at Yahara Software. Over the course of my career, I've implemented systems in multiple systems, both commercial systems as well as custom systems in laboratories, helped instrumentation companies develop and design and develop applications. I've moved more into a role now where I'm staging our projects, so working with either our existing clients to really understand their needs and really focus in those needs and organize a software development project around that. Or something we're pretty excited about recently is that we've started a ventures arm where we talk to early stage startups about their software needs and try to stage engagements with them that will ensure their success.
So when things go wrong, we wanted to start off a little bit about telling you guys things that commonly happen when we work with companies. And for this, I think it's Jamie that's going to speak a little bit on it.
Becky.
Becky.
I get to start with the Debbie Downer story. So one of the most common challenge that we find happens with our clients' projects is when it comes to content evaluation, migration, and content entry. At the start of each project, we ask folks what their target launch date is, whether it aligns with key events like a conference or a press release, or some industry seasonality like home deck building starts in April, or our annual performance schedule begins in October. So we want to get the project done before then. So using that date, we work backward to establish a timeline that includes the key milestones. So kickoff, our development cycles, training the client, content migration and entry, QA, and then launch. So as the product owner, your primary focus, and it won't be the only focus, but the two critical aspects are user acceptance testing. So at the end, you'll confirm that we built what we agreed to build, and content creation and entry. So ensuring the product's brand is correct and the content reflects your voice. And content entry always demands more effort than anyone wants it to or anticipates. I've seen projects delayed up to 16 months because the content entry, taking photos, writing, culling, migrating or not migrating, all those decisions just weren't prioritized, and that delayed the project. But since you know your product best, your involvement is crucial in that part of the process. And a downfall of that delay is that the longer a project remains unlaunched, the greater the risk of it becoming stale. Your internal priorities shift, motivation wanes. You find yourself assigned to a new project because the boss thought this one should have been launched by April or October. So you're on to the next thing that was in that late year strategic plan. So we do recommend assigning a dedicated team member internally to lead this effort to keep the project on track. And if possible, this person should have their regular responsibilities minimized or removed if possible during the duration of the content entry phase. And that focus will give them the mental space to create content, delegate to get help from the external arms of the project, organize, and then input that content effectively, which will ensure a successful project launch, complete with unicorns and rainbows.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And then getting ahead of the inevitable.
Yeah, so I love the unicorns and rainbows, by the way. It's beautiful. So when things go right, kind of like, and they're like, there's no like one way because everyone's, project is a little bit unique, but there's some, you know, I guess there's a little story of, one way things went really, really well, kind of getting ahead of all these pitfalls. And so we had, a client come and they have a really tight budget, really tight deadline, long list of feature needs. This is not uncommon to kind of see these things. Everyone needs it now and perfect, and get their business up and running. But in this case, we were able to work really closely with this client, and our tech lead and our business analysts were able to get in there, scope features with them early on, in this like iterative rolling process. So we were able to kind of grasp the overall need and start building to that need while figuring out specific aspects of it. And then getting, scoping those tighter, so then, building the components as they were kind of designed. And so there was like a really tight coordination and cooperation between us, the client, and because they're the experts for what they're trying to do, or the experts in the building of what they're trying to do. How can we make all of those needs inside the budget, inside the timeline? And it was really just like an ongoing process, right? And so some of the reasons this really worked well is we were able to catch any issues and inconsistencies earlier. Is this really what you need? Is it not? They came with a very open-minded technologies, so it's not like they were, hung up on a specific way of doing something, so that we might be able to provide a way to do something maybe quicker, maybe better, something along those lines. Um, and then also, they were also heavily involved in the testing of features. So as we were done developing something, they get their fingers in it, see like, is this actually what we expected it to do? Is this really going to fit our need? Things like that. And then catching them, as we're developing. So it's a quick fix usually to just like go in and tweak something, as long as it's not a major departure, which usually we catch early in the process anyway. So really, I think there's a better end product when there's that tight cooperation and trust between, the people with the idea and those who are creating the product. Just ends up in a much better place. I guess unicorns and rainbows. There you go. So
The best place.
the best way. So
Chuck, you're muted.
Oh, okay. Now we begin the part of the discussion where it's more of an open panel discussion, guys. So feel free to hit us up with questions in the chat. Any kind of questions that you have specifically around the topics. We'll be covering 3 different topics. Budget and resources will be first, process and implementation will be next, and then compliance, ownership, and security will be last. I will kick off a couple questions, and then any questions that we have in the chat, our team will be able to answer kind of live. So the first thing, I guess, about budget and resources is when we talk about software initiatives, people are always curious about, what's it going to cost? So right away, we'll just rip the Band-Aid off and kind of try to tackle that question. And for that one, I'm going to go to Garrett to start.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've all asked the question of your vendors, or as you're pulling together, even your internal teams, what's it going to cost? And the answer always has to be, I'm sorry, but it depends. That is the standard answer. But I want to kind of back into that a little bit more, and say, first of all, I think starting with cost is maybe a mistake anyway. It's relatively straightforward to figure out the raw cost of a software development project in terms of the resources that are going to develop the software. Josh and his team, Jamie and her team, you can go out and do Glassdoor or any type of research. You can see the loaded cost of a developer on any team, at least in the US, is going to be between 80, 90,000 to 150, $200,000, depending on their skill, depending on their experience, depending on what they're doing. But that's what the loaded annual cost of a developer is. We're all paying roughly the same amount. Yes, you can have some less expensive resources coming from other regions or whatnot. I will say that tends to be for larger projects where that plays out, and there are some complexities there, and your loaded costs are still going to be roughly in that same range. That's not really the best question to ask, though, because that's not really the cost. That's in many cases not even the majority of the cost that you're going to spend in building software, building and owning a software product. As Becky pointed out, you also have to really take into account the cost of your internal team's time, whether you're creating content, whether they're going to provide subject matter expertise, whether they're going to provide testing support. There's just a multitude of things. The sponsors and the amount of time sponsors need to spend on projects is typically underestimated. At least successful projects is typically underestimated. So it's really a matter of stepping back and taking all of those costs into account and saying, okay, really what I need isn't so much what's my total spend going to be, but really where is my focus going to be? Because any project management software certainly is in the same realm. Really, you look at 4 vectors. You look at cost, you look at time and schedule. And this is again something I think is a lot of times undervalued. If you can get something, if you can use the Pareto principle, get the 20% of the value out much more quickly. I'm sorry, the 80% of the value out much more quickly, and then spend some time evaluating whether you even need to do work beyond that. You can save a lot of costs, overall costs, if you can really hone in with your project sponsors on the goal that you're trying to accomplish. and what the key characteristics of that goal are, what success is going to be. And then, as Josh was saying, then really have your team focused on facilitating the creation of the features that support those goals, and maybe deprioritizing things that are outside of that domain. You can really affect both the cost and the timeline. And then finally, and the thing that, again, I think that really needs to be focused on is that when you're creating software, you're creating a transformational, hopefully, at least if you're taking on something this big, it's supposed to be transformational within the organization, which is very exciting, but also comes with components of risk. And so I think the fourth aspect, time budget and resources is risk. You really do need to go through a structured risk analysis. What can go wrong? What are we going to do about if these things do go wrong? As Josh was saying earlier, having some contingency plans that say that almost no project plan gets through the first week unadulterated. And having a plan as to how we're going to do that, and setting sort of the limits of how far down some of these rabbit holes we will chase before we say it's outside of our objectives. So it's a complicated question, like I said, but I think if you focus on those things and maybe then come back and start talking about budget, and does the overall budget that we're going to invest really meet our sponsors' needs? I think you'll have a much better answer than trying to start from, I want to spend $100,000, I want to spend $50,000, what can I get? I think that's almost always a mistake.
Thank you, Garrett. Does anyone on the panel have any thoughts?
Yeah, and I wanted to add on to that is like the other thing you need to consider is how much is not having the solution costing your company, because that can factor into how much you can budget, right? Like if it's causing a lot of inefficiencies within your team, and what happens if that shared document disappears? What's that going to cost your business? So I think that's another thing is before you take these on, make sure you're internally reviewing why you're doing this and what you need to get out of it to make it successful.
That's exactly right, Jamie. I think the best thing you can do to start a software project is, before you even call Josh and his team in, is to really get a handle on your ROI model. Why are you doing it? What costs are you trying to save? What objectives are you trying to obtain, and what are their value? Really understand not just the dollar amounts, but the reasons behind those dollar amounts, and then then you have an idea of the scale of your problem and how you can address it.
Right. And I guess, and one too is like, it's not just the cost of doing it, but what's the cost of maybe not doing it? Like, what are you burning? What is this going to solve? Just taking all that into account.
And the cost, I should point out, and the cost of owning it. Once you've built it, understand the cost of owning it moving forward. Becky, like you were saying, most systems, you don't create the content at the beginning and then you're done.
Right. Yeah, there's the best part about these products being digital is that it's not a printed brochure. You can change it forever. And people do and should, because your content should be fresh for the user that you're trying to focus on.
Perfect. Next question is for Becky, and my question is, what specific resources, time, money, staff should we plan for content creation, migration, entry, everything encompassing bringing on a new software solution to a team as a business owner?
I'm going to borrow a page from Garrett's book and say it depends. So just like the cost of this product can vary greatly. The quantity of what you're going to produce to put into the product is based on the size of the thing we're going to build. So if it's a 5-page brochure website, maybe you could get away with one person spending a week on writing content, getting it approved by their boss, and working back and forth internally on that, and then entering the content in the site. If it's a website, we just did one for a client that had, let's see, maybe 30 new pages, and we were also migrating over about 100 existing articles. I would venture to guess it took them, I think they were working 20-hour days for a couple weeks there. So that's, I'll put it at probably 100 hours for a new website with called content and writing new material. Then if we're getting into like an application, there's interface design, and there's field names and error messages, and those are the responsible party for writing those might fall to the developer or the development team, because we're exposed more to that sort of interface design where you wouldn't write an error message that says something went wrong. You would want to get more specific. So depending on the content type, can also change how long it's going to take to do and who's going to do it.
I don't know. Generic error message are sometimes nice.
Right.
Not
Something
usually.
wrong,
That's more. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say there's also content that you don't think about, like you mentioned error messages, but even like, all right, is your system going to send out emails to let people know when events have changed? You're going to need to write out the templates so that we can properly create those emails. And so there's a lot of hidden content you might not have thought about as well. So you're going to have to, reserve time to do that. And depending on the type of email, that can take, hours or days to create those emails as well.
And it's not just the authors that you have to take into account. The content is needs to be tested in the same way the software does, and the content by and large, I mean, there are some now new AI tools out there that'll help a bit, but the content by and large really has to be tested or validated by subject matter experts who are also able to play an editor role. And then the last thing I would add to this is then if you're trying to work in a multilingual environment, multiply by the number of languages at least. So yeah, it's a often overlooked cost of doing a project that's can easily achieve the same levels of magnitude as the development itself.
Yeah.
Next question is for Garrett again. What about ongoing support? What does that look like when it comes to implementing software solutions?
I'm sorry, could you say it again?
What is ongoing support?
Oh, ongoing support. Yes. Yeah, this is an interesting thing. The Standish group has done studies. I can't quote the name of the study anymore. I should have looked that up. But Standish group has done studies that have stated that the cost of ownership, the total cost of ownership of a software system, is typically 2 to 5 times the development cost over the course of the time you own it. So ongoing support is something that you really do have to take into account. And again, there's a lot of, maybe I would call them hidden costs involved there. As we just said, first of all, software is a living, breathing piece of asset that you have, and it does typically need to have technical resources that are going to be there to help you, whether it's a purchased software and you're paying the vendor to provide that support, or whether you've got something customized and you're going to pay your own resources to provide that support. You need to do everything from maintain the software as new security vulnerabilities and other issues start to arise, maintain the software in the technical environments as they evolve, because the software does become aged out within the environments that we run it in. It's almost all business processes, evolve over time, and the software needs to be adjusted to affect that. You have everything from mergers and acquisitions to, completely new lines of business to, new regulations. All of those things need to be reflected in your software. So ongoing maintenance and support, is inevitable, and that's, those are all the things, or those are all some things that you don't think about. And then, obviously then keep in mind the costs of, whatever the environments are. Many of the systems that we're supporting now are hosted in cloud environments. And so you've got ongoing costs of, paying for those environments to exist, and supporting those as well. So lots of things to think about in terms of ongoing support. In terms of custom software, I think this is a particularly pertinent question, and one that you should talk about with a vendor. If you're working with Earthling or Yahara, I know that you would be talking about this, because it's part of our onboarding with the new clients is, what does that look like, at least for the first year or so afterwards? Would you like to continue to work with our team? Do we want to, build out a relationship that way? Do we want to hand this software off to an internal team? And if so, what's that handoff going to look like? And you can really, by thinking about it ahead of time, structure those things in a much more cost-effective way than, sort of quote unquote being surprised by it at the end of, on release. Okay, now who's going to handle this? Is really not a great plan. So yeah, those are some things I would take into account.
Yep. And in the chat, Karen's asking for you to repeat that estimate that you said.
So
the 2 to 5 times over what period of time is the question?
Over the life of the software. So that means that I don't know if they said, but I'll tell you just from my experience, I would say most software systems have a lifetime of about 10 years before they finally are fading in. And so you can kind of plan on owning a piece of software that you put into place for about 10 years. That's my estimate. That's not a Standish Group estimate. But I do know they said in that it was 2 to 5 times the cost of building the software is your total cost of ownership.
And I think one thing Garrett said actually was really good too, is because you always hear that story about that one piece of software that's been living in a mainframe somewhere for 20 years. Nobody's touched it except it just does its thing, right? But I mean, there's still someone in charge of, like, they'll get an alert on their system and it's like, oh, whatever box that is needs to be turned off and on again or rebooted or what. I mean, so there's still stuff going on even if you're not directly touching the software. Like the cloud hosted environments, someone's making sure that at least the server is up and running, and then people can access it, stuff like that. So that was really good.
This is a good example. I mean,
oh yeah, certificates are updated.
Certificates, we don't renew a certificate, or we do, but I mean, say that
something doesn't.
You have to renew a certificate, and now large systems are no longer operational. Yeah, another point along this, I go back to that whole risks point, is you also need to evaluate the risk of owning software. And a lot of times, the cost may not be expanding as you own older software. It typically does a little bit, but the risk of just maintaining an old and from a security vector, from a lot of other respects,
integration
starts to sneak up on organizations. And I would say that's a pretty common story for why we have these sort of emergency fix projects where we have to build something really, really quickly. Is all of a sudden something that we sort of have been organizationally relying on for the last 5 years without even really realizing it, is now going to be forced end of life because of a vulnerability, or forced end of life because the vendor is no longer supporting it, or there's all kinds of things that happen like that. And I don't think we necessarily always maintain a good monitoring of the risks of owning software like that.
Yeah, even with websites and now hosts are forcing a PHP upgrade, we're finding plugins that folks haven't, that we installed 7 to 9 years ago that are no longer maintained, so they're not compatible. Sites are crashing. It's chaos.
Yes. And now we're going to move on to the next part, which is process and implementation. And to kick this part off, I'm going to ask Jamie, how do I integrate my current process and team in my process, my team, and how do I get them to buy in into like a new software solution? Usually adoption is something that a lot of companies struggle with.
Yeah, so there's kind of two really good ways that we found that I think industry-wide are really helpful is one, as you begin this project, make sure that you have like a project lead, a project sponsor on your team who that is like they are going to be the champion for that, not only with the vendor, but internally with your team. They'll be the one responsible for making sure that the right content gets in, that the right features get in, so that we can make sure that we're providing you the the product that you need, right? And so the other one to go right along with that is involve your team, right? Like if they're going to be the ones that are going to be using this at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones that are going to complain to you when it doesn't work with their processes, when it's slow, you're going to hear about it. So involve them early, hear what their problems are so that the project can properly resolve those problems. And then also they may have ideas for enhancing efficiencies. And so getting to hear those early so we can design the project really helps. So, once you get to the point where you're going to have to roll this out to them, they're already excited about it. They already feel like they've been heard and that this is something that's going to solve the issues that they've been dealing with.
Yeah, I think there was one Magento project that we did, and we happened to overhear, or there was a person that worked on the tangentially on the purchasing process, and she was having to copy and paste order numbers from one system to another, and we were able to solve that problem by essentially overhearing and what should have been an interview with her, but getting her feedback and involved in the beginning of the process. We were able to change her work life for the better.
So many other thoughts on the panel?
I think one thing you could do too is just try to create almost like an excitement or an energy, especially like it's not like, oh, we're making this thing. It's like this is gonna help you so much. It's gonna save you so much time, or it's gonna, take this whole annoying thing, your TPS reports, to quote an old movie, off the table. You don't have to do those anymore, and kind of talk about how it's why you're doing it, and what how it's gonna benefit people. Just to kind of yeah, make it exciting. Well, as exciting as software can be, but
one of the
it's super
practices
exciting.
yeah.
One of the practices that we have that I think is kind of important in this regard is you should at the beginning of a project have a communications plan, and plan to communicate things like Jamie and Josh and Becky are talking about, from the beginning. So, some of the most fun things about creating software projects are to be able to celebrate when you've really made somebody's life, much easier. And some of these jobs of, in laboratories, we see this all the time of people, writing down results and then having to type them into a spreadsheet so they can import it into a system, and being able to just automatically collect those from the instruments, and it's almost magical to them. That's the fun parts of software. And even in the cases, I mean, a lot of times, we do have to implement practices or procedures that are going to add slightly more work to a certain individual's day. But if you can really have a good communication plan and understand organizationally what the value of that work is, you can get people excited about doing something even another step if they know that what they're doing is really adding enormous value to their organization. And being able to communicate that, having a plan to communicate that is important.
Perfect. Becky, how long does something like this take? How long will a team be bought in? How long do I have to wait if I'm implementing this in my organization?
So that was the first thing I thought of when Josh said to make it something to celebrate. And personally, it's hard for me to think about something that's a year and a half to 2 years away to celebrate. But a large scale custom software solution can take that long. So we'll start there, from that scale down to a website that somehow we just completed in 2 weeks. So that's an easy thing, to celebrate and keep the momentum going internally. And so it can be anywhere in between those two things. I wouldn't expect a website in less than 2 weeks, though.
Perfect.
One thing I would add to that, though, is that it's really ideal to plan for interim releases and as much as possible get value as early as possible. It's a pretty rare 2-year project that is successful if there's one big release at the end of 2 years. You really do have to hit the ground as soon as possible with value and show value. And build on that. So as you're doing your planning, if you can find a way to do that, that's my strongest recommendation. And if you can't do that, you really do have to manage the risk. And the only way to manage those risks, aside from making sure that you stay on track target wise in terms of development, is a very, very strong communication plan. So the
plus,
best
I think
communication is putting software in front of people and having them see progress.
Yeah, I think plus from a process point, you can start to work the new software into people's daily life earlier, right? So it's like, even if it's like this is just it's syncing with already existing data, and now it's just a new way to look at it and use it. And then you add the pieces to edit and add new data or new features, and you kind of like slowly they adopt it into their normal process instead of just okay, you're not doing this anymore, you're doing this at the end of 2 years. And that can be a very jarring transition.
Yeah.
Next question is for Josh. We're going to go back to you. Can my team just grab an off-the-shelf solution, or do I really need to go with some custom software? And can you explain why I should go with one way or the other?
Answer the first question, sure, why not? Answer to the broader question, again, it depends. I think there's definitely some pros and cons with off-the-shelf solutions, and the best thing to really think about with that is, does it actually fit your need? There's a lot of incredible systems that have a lot of power and money behind them, that do a lot of really good things. And if that fits your need, I think that's great. You will typically be spending some sort of licensing fee to use that software, so it's not like you bought it and own it and maintain it yourself. But that will get you typically moving quicker, if that solution works for you. I think the pitfall there is that there's a lot of things that you may not control at that point. Does it work? Does it not fit every need you have? Are you trying to leverage this into your process, and make it work for you instead of just having something designed for your actual need? And then, ongoing feature development. If you need something new, you need something added in. You have a new process that for your business that just doesn't work with this third-party solution. Those are some of the pitfalls. Another one too is where is that data going? Do you own it? Does somebody else get access to it? There's a lot of concerns there with some third-party solutions. So it's just something to be very aware of, that though it may look really good and fit maybe 60, 70% of your need, that last 30% really might, trip you up in the end, especially when you're talking about accessing that data, using it for yourself, integrations, things like that. And kind of growing your business towards the future. And I guess to that point too, especially with custom solutions, you can build something for your now and work with your partner. A lot of time, I know Earthling, you do this, Yahara, we do this, where we ask you where your trajectory is, where you think you might be going, so that we don't pigeonhole that software into now, and it can be developed with that future in mind, as you need it. So.
This question comes up a lot in laboratories. There's a type of a system in laboratories called a LIMS or an LIS, depending on the type of laboratory you are. And people ask us all the time, should we go out and purchase an LIS or a LIM system, or should we build one internally? And I will tell you, most of the time in that specific use case, I tell people to buy one, not to build one. But where I think you want to think about it is, like Josh said, if you're doing something like if you're implementing an accounting system, it's pretty unlikely you're trying to differentiate your business by the way you're doing accounting. The same thing within a lot of things that you're doing in like a CRM or other systems. It's likely that you're using industry standard, pretty broadly accepted business processes, in which case it's likely that an off-the-shelf system and configuring it to sort of fit your needs is a pretty good match. However, if you do have, and we have some laboratories, we've got some transportation examples where the way they want to use that system is very different and very much the way they're going to differentiate their business from others. That's a perfect example of where you should start looking at custom projects. Especially, I guess in those cases, that's where I think sometimes I've seen organizations get into some trouble with cost solutions or commercial solutions. It's a bad idea to buy a commercial system and then try to reconfigure it into doing something it was never intended to do in the first place. You need to stay very well aligned with your vendor's objectives if you're buying a commercial system. And if what you really want to do is outside the norm of the industry, I think you really want to consider very heavily software development. And in those cases, I think you're going to find that the cost of software development, as opposed to the cost of transforming a commercial system into something it's not, are at least equivalent, in the risk profile of your custom development is probably lower.
Great. And we do have a question in the chat for the panel: is as a development shop, what do you need to do to ensure that a custom built solution is ready to be assumed by an internal team?
You need a project sponsor. I think that's the biggest thing is, so as a development team, we need to hear what you're trying to solve, how you're trying to solve it. So first, we start with the planning. So we create a plan with you that you agree to, that says, this is what we believe will solve the internal problems team, or the internal team's problem. And so as you go through, we develop it, we'll release it in parts. And as we go through, the last part of that is the acceptance testing. So the client is saying through this plan that they are agreeing that this is what they wanted developed and that it meets all of their needs. So that's, I think, the biggest thing that we do to make sure it's ready. And then there may be other things we'll do for as far as like testing. So if you have a very, very large team, we might do like load testing, making sure that all of our infrastructure and everything is ready for your team to all hit it at once, things like that. But the biggest point to make sure it's ready for the U is like the acceptance testing, making sure that what we have developed is what we said we would develop and it meets your needs.
And that planning is so important, especially, this is why it's important to talk about this ahead of time, because as you're developing it, if we have a good understanding of who on your team is going to take over the system, part of the stories we write then are, part of that acceptance testing is them agreeing that they now understand the components that they would need to take this on. So whether it's a user acceptance to be able to train other users, or whether it's your technical team to take on the ongoing maintenance, part of the planning should be that the handoff is not just did you test the functionality, but did you test the ability of your team to be able to take it on. It's fairly rare, and really only for very small projects, where there can be just a week-long handoff period. Handoff of systems has to happen over a longer period of time, and have these, as Jamie said, these multiple mini check-ins that, yes, we agree that we've made it. It's crucial that you have that plan ahead of time. So that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
as far as I see in the chat here, the other question comes up with, documentation, files, history, bug testing, that kind of thing. That's actually very straightforward at this point now. I mean, most of the systems that we all use, Jira and various different source control systems and documentation systems, being able to hand over the documentation and even, build the documentation to spec, that's really kind of the easy part at this point. uh, uh, I would say that it's really more where Jamie was going, where you have to have a plan and you really do have to, integrate your team in with the plan of them taking it over from the beginning. And those documents are, are just part of the deliverables along with the code at that point. Handing over, taking a Jira repository or taking a code repository and transferring ownership at this point, thank goodness, is actually fairly straightforward. We do it fairly regularly. It's not just by the fact those things also. There's the whole DevSecOps infrastructure that also has to be transferred. But again, there's pretty well established processes for doing that, and it's rarely a problem anymore. I'm sorry, Josh, that's probably your expertise.
No, you're good. That was really good. The only one I'd add to it is that if the intention is for like an internal team to take it on, typically a member of that team is part of the process too. And then, we're not choosing technologies out of a void. It's like, okay, whatever, like we typically use React as a default, but it's like, if that's not going to work for you, your team doesn't want to do that. It's like that can be discussed and planned early in the thing. So you're not choosing technologies that your team is just uncomfortable with. There's a lot of different ways stuff can be built these days. And that's, I guess, one of the perks of the custom route is that you can build it exactly for your needs, both technologically, hosting, what it's actually going to do, how your team's going to interact with it. Even where it's hosted, like in a cloud, or do you need, for security reasons, to have it on your exact physical premise so that there's no lines going out into the outside world. There are some places that need that level of security. So
yeah, and I was just going to put out, during development, we often have multiple environments where we have this code for testing. So you can also get your internal team exposed to the product as it's being built on one of these testing environments. It's pretty standard to have multiple testing environments nowadays.
And to the degree that you want, user documentation and those kinds of things, there's no reason to not be building that. There's every reason to build that within those test environments well before you release. Again, I don't love the idea of build the software and then document it afterwards. It's really not a very effective way of getting it done.
No.
Now we're jumping over into compliance, ownership, and security, and we do have about 10 more minutes. So we'll try to go through some of these questions. But the first question when it comes to compliance, ownership, and security is for Jamie. What laws and regulations do I or any person in charge of implementing a new software solution need to be aware about?
So this is pretty broad topic. And one thing you're going to find with a lot of development shops is, unsurprisingly, we're not lawyers, right? So we're going to know about kind of the high level laws that affect many different industries, just general tech laws, things like the GDPR, maybe some general ideas on HIPAA compliance, some of the rules and regulations around how money transactions have to be handled. But we're not going to know every specific detail. And we work with companies in many different industries, and those laws are different from industry to industry. So one thing, we always recommend is that if you're going to be taking on a project like this, and especially if you're going to be handling sensitive information, that you have a lawyer who specializes in tech on your side at the beginning of the project, so that we can make sure that we are handling everything, that we are aware of all the laws and regulations that you specifically need to follow before we start building this. Because trying to shoehorn that in later is a huge, massive headache and will blow up a budget like you would not believe.
And I think you mentioned this in our pre-chat, but also depending on where you're doing business can also drastically affect your regulations too. Like is the data privacy is different in Europe or individual countries in Europe even versus the US versus
California.
California. Yeah, California. It's all just crazy. So it's just got to be aware of where you're trying to do business and what industry you're in, and yeah.
And something we run into a fair amount too that I would caution people to be aware of is that in some cases you need to have your system validated or certified by an agency. For instance, some of the stuff we do needs to be certified by FDA regulation, and making sure that you take into account what that certification process is going to be and the timing of it is important because, as Jamie said, doing it after the fact it's a disaster. You really have to plan to manage whatever that situation is going to be before you start writing the software and as you write the software.
I'll add on that with accessibility compliance.
That's another one, very important.
That doesn't start with code, pen to paper, code to pixel. It starts with the design. What if your logo is light blue on dark blue, and in someone that's colorblind can't differentiate that letter because they can't see it. So it starts way back at the beginning of your notion of branding, and then we make our code compliant, and then it also extends to the content entry, and to fix all that the week before launch is not a good idea.
Yeah.
I also think one note though too is that there's a lot of, especially with color compliance things or basic security concerns. If you're working with a good partner, a lot of that they'll default and kind of recommend to you. But it's more your specific industry needs that are really the question that we may not know. Like, I know I should hash a password on my database so no one can log into it and just get access to everybody's passwords to the system. Like, that's not something you necessarily need to think about as someone coming to a tech partner. But I may not know niche details about I don't know, approving something for consumption or whatever I don't know, whatever your product or anything is. So yeah.
Next question is for Garrett. Who owns my data once you guys are developing it?
Well, I know we're sort of running towards the end of the time here, so this is a fairly big topic, but I will say this is a really important question now. There was a time, 10 years ago when that was really a question. Do I own it? Is it the originator of the data, or is it the person that's curating the data that owns it? And it was really that simple. But it's oftentimes not that simple anymore, and you really need to start thinking about who has the right to have specific use of various different parts of my data, and how are those licenses being transformed. We've all heard about ChatGPT and how they're using data. That doesn't necessarily transfer ownership of that data to them. That's a good example of where they express certain licenseship rules of it. So it's a complex question, and one that really does deserve a more detailed answer. But I do want to start there by saying, it's important to think about not just who originated, who's curating it, but also what usages are going to be made of that data and what rights do those entities have, not just in the use of it, but also in maintaining its security and maintaining its exposure risks and all of those kinds of things. It's pretty rare anymore that we can really just say one person owns the data.
Thank you for that answer. And like Garrett said, we are coming up on time. We do have a nice just questionnaire trying to see how we did, guys. So feel free to scan the code when you get a second, and just give us some feedback on how we did today. But outside of that, we're going to give you guys a few more minutes. Anything the panelists want to wrap up with before we move on to the final slide?
I just want to cap I know we didn't quite get to this question, but just be careful when you're using tools like ChatGPT or AI tooling. It is a tool. It's not a magic solution. If you're not paying for it, most likely you're paying for it in your data that you're giving to them. And just be very aware of look at their terms and conditions for how that data is used. They can be very powerful tools. We use them internally. We pay for a license that protects the data we put into it, and it increases our developers' throughput. And it can be used for a lot of really good things. But just be aware of how you're using it and what you're using it for. We still do need human intervention. Unfortunately, we're not at a stage where AI can completely take over our lives, but even though it seems like that.
Yeah, it really is only at the point where it can be a useful assistant, but it needs oversight. It's still at the point where it's giving incorrect responses, it's giving incomplete responses, and so it also depends on how it's trained, so it can give very biased responses. So you always do need somebody there
Actually,
watching over its shoulder.
Yeah. A fun one I heard recently, a doctor had a question on and he was testing it out, and he did if I give X, Y, and Z, what's a possible, outcome of this diagnosis or whatever. And they gave it gave the right answer that he was expecting, but the information it used to back it up, it was 2 real studies and a study that it completely fabricated. So it fabricated a study to support its answer. Yes, the outcome was correct, but it's just an example of sometimes these things go off the rails and you're like, but that's not an actual study. You just made that up to support your answer. And
yeah. I was gonna say I heard of a lawsuit. This was about a year back, but it's still doing this stuff. It did something very similar to a lawyer. It made up a study, a case, and he cited the case in an actual case.
Oh no!
Yeah, he got
that's pretty
censored.
Yeah.
Got a lot of trouble for that one. So
yeah, but a good, very useful tool. I'm not saying don't use it. I use it a lot, but just be aware.
Well, and if anybody's interested in talking about AI, I'd be happy to kind of expand on that conversation. You guys are talking about LLMs, which are an aspect of AI, but there's a whole range of things with machine learning and computer visualization and things that we do use fairly often, and integrate in fairly often. So I'm happy to talk through that a little bit more with anybody that would like to. But yeah, it is certainly like any other technology, you need to look at it with some caution and understand what you're trying to accomplish and what the reality versus hype is. And from a data security standpoint, that's another, as we're talking about, especially large language models, the amount of data that's necessary for them to be effective is, it really does start to expose. It's rare that all comes from one organization. You really do have to expose data, multi-organizationally to achieve what you're even trying to accomplish. And so it boils back to the original question in terms of who owns my data. This is a pretty good example of usage of data that's, going to have to be acceptable, but we have to navigate through.
Yeah, and we've kind of the technology's moved beyond the law structure to balance it too, which is they're still trying to catch up to that.
Yes. So in summary, guys, basically what we want to do and how hopefully you guys take away from today's conversation, we are at the hour, is find a partner that you can trust. You know your business best. So at the end of the day, know what you want to solve, what business challenge you're trying to solve. And as long as you can fully understand what you want that to look like or how efficient you need it to be within your business, a good partner can find the right solution for you. Expect both time and monetary investment. These things do take time and they do take a significant upfront investment, but at the end of the day, it's to kind of help you become more efficient whatever you're doing. And a good way to kind of realize the ROI is how much of the opportunity cost, how much time is the inaction of having an efficient software costing you versus how much time is it going to save you after the fact too. And then software and websites do need ongoing maintenance. That's hopefully another takeaway, because if you sit there and wait and not try to do any maintenance, then it's usually broken and it's usually a larger cost had you just been upkeeping it as you were going. But thank you very much for joining us, guys. Yahara is hosting the High Tech Happy Hour at the Memorial Union from 5 to 7. on Thursday.
Beautiful
And
weather
then,
for that, by the way. Please do come out for it.
yeah, last year was really hot. So this year we're very excited. It's going to be actually nice weather. And then Becky, did you want to talk a little bit more about the Ask Me Anything for Earthling?
Yeah, starting in September, probably on the 19th, we're gonna do an Ask Me Anything panel similar to this, but without preset questions. So we'll set that up on LinkedIn and invite folks to join us.
Becky, I've got all kinds of questions already set up. Yeah, they're preset.
Thank you.
Good to have somebody coming locked and loaded.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and everyone have a wonderful rest of their day.
And thank you, Chuck, for organizing this.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.